Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another video and another reading of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Now then, just a couple things. A huge thank you to who's been hitting subscribe. I looked at my subscribers, we're up to 420. That is great, that's awesome actually. But a huge thank you to all of you. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Cold as clay. And yeah, you guys are probably gonna have to bear with me. I've got kind of a sinus cold a little bit here, so just bear with me. So, a farmer had a daughter from whom he cared more than anything on earth. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim, but the farmer did not think Jim was good enough for his daughter. To keep them apart, he sent her to live with her uncle on the other side of the county. Soon after she left, Jim got sick and he wasted away and died. Everyone said he died of a broken heart. The farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death, he could not tell his daughter what happened. She continued to think about Jim and the life they might have had together. That's sad, man. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock on her uncle's door. When the girl opened the door, Jim was standing there. "Your father asked me to get you," he said. "I came on his best horse." Sorry, guys. "Is there anything wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. She packed a few things and they left. She rode behind him, clinging to his waist. Soon he complained of a headache. "It ached something terrible," he told her. She put her hand on his forehead. "Why, you are cold as clay," she said. "I hope you are not ill." And she wrapped her handkerchief around his head. They traveled so swiftly that in a few hours they reached the farm. The girl quickly dismounted and knocked on the door. Her father was startled to see her. "Didn't you send for me?" she asked. "No, I didn't," he said. She turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. They went to the stable to look for them. The horse was there. It was covered with sweat and trembling with fear, but there was no sign of Jim. Terrified, her father quickly told her the truth about Jim's death. Then quickly he went to see Jim's parents. They decided to open the grave. The corpse was in its coffin, but around the head they found the girl's handkerchief. That's a little bit scary. I don't necessarily believe in ghosts and the other side and whatnot. I do believe in Bigfoot, but there's a lot of stories of people who have died of terrible deaths crossing back over to kind of say hi to their loved ones real quick before they go. But that might just be a story. It might just be people talking. No one really knows. But anyhow, we move on here. The White Wolf. The timber wolves around French Creek had gotten out of hand. There were so many wolves, the farmers could not stop from killing their cattle and sheep. So the state put a bounty on them. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt he turned in. A butcher in town named Bill Williams thought that was pretty good money. He stopped working as a butcher and started killing wolves, and he was very good at it. Every year he killed over 500 of them. That came to me more than $5,000. It was quite a bit of money back in those days. After 4 or 5 years, Bill had killed so many wolves there were hardly any left in that area, so he retired and vowed never to harm another wolf, because wolves had made him rich. Then one day, a farmer reported that a white wolf had killed 2 of his sheep. He shot at it and hit it, but the bullets didn't have any effect. Soon the white wolf was seen all over the countryside, killing and running, but nobody could stop it. One night, it came into Bill's yard and he killed his pet crow. Bill forgot about his decision never to harm another wolf. He went into town the next morning and bought a young lamb for bait. He took it out to the hills and tied it to a tree. Then he backed off about 50 yards and sat down under another tree with his gun in his lap. When Bill didn't come back, his friends started looking for him. Finally, they found the lamb. It was tied to a tree. It was hungry, but it was alive. Then they found Bill. He was sitting against the other tree, but he was dead. His throat had been torn open, but there was no sign of struggle. His gun hadn't even been fired, and there was no tracks in the soil around him. As for the wolf, it was never seen again. So through the years, this wolf goes by many names, but I know it as the Bloodless Howler. The Bloodless Howler is a canine type creature. It will tear the throat area out of its victims and drink their blood. A lot of people have said you can shoot at this beast, but the creature will just stand there as if it's not affected by the bullets. Bullets are said to actually pass right through this creature. Of course, that might be all stories, but you know, folklore and retold. You gotta remember that. Let's get to the next one here. The haunted house. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they would always get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, and went in, built himself a good fire and lit a lamp, sat there reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth and back and forth. Then it sounded like someone was trying to scream and get choked off. Then there were lots of thrashing around sounds and struggling. Finally, everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat there watching the door to the cellar. The footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy, like there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, step, step up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat up, watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door opened. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Oh gosh, that's can you guys see that? Oh, that's a little bit much, ain't it? But anyhow, the haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out of existence. That's kind of creepy. The old preacher waited and waited, and when he didn't hear any more noise, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly. Step, 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 closer and closer, step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly started to turn, and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet like he said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dripping off her face, and he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was sort of a blue light way in her eye sockets, and she had no nose on her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover killed her for money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then I heard something. Let's see. Then she told him to take the joint of the little finger from her hand and to lay it on the collection plate at the church at the next church meeting. He'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, if you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church. The haunt sobbed like she was tired. She sunk towards the floor, and she was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, long story short, he confessed to the murder and they took him to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went to that house one midnight, and the haunt's voice did tell him to dig up the hearth rock. He did, and found a big sack of money, and where that haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never did come out. Whew. Well, besides the thing, that's probably my favorite story so far. Anyhow, I'm going to read one more for you this afternoon. This short story is called The Guests. Anyhow, a young man and his wife were on a trip to visit his mother. Usually, they arrived in time for supper, but they had gotten a late start and now it was getting dark. So they decided to look for a place to stay overnight and go in the morning. Just off the road, they saw a small house in the woods. Maybe they rent rooms, the wife said, so they stopped to ask. Bad idea. An elderly man and woman came to the door. They didn't rent rooms, they said, but they said they would be glad to have them stay overnight as their guests. They had plenty of rooms and they would enjoy the company. The old woman made coffee and brought out some cake, and the four of them talked for a while. Then the young couple were taken to their rooms. They again explained that they wanted to pay for this, but the old man said he would not accept any money. The young couple got up early the next morning and before their hosts awakened. On a table near the front door, they left an envelope with some money in it for the room. Then they went on their way to the next town. They stopped in a restaurant and had breakfast. When they told the owner where they had stayed, he was shocked. That can't be, he said. That house burned down to the ground, and the man and woman who lived there died in the fire. The young couple could not believe it, so they went back to the house. Only now there was no house. All they found was a burned out shell. They stood staring at the ruins, trying to understand what happened. Then the woman screamed. In the rubble was a badly burned table, like they had seen by the front door. On the table was the envelope that they had left that morning. Now that, dear readers, is freaky. I'm telling you, tragic events that happen to two or more people, to a single person, to more people, sometimes stuff just happens. In this case, it was the possible spirits of two people showing friendliness to two travelers. That's a little bit freaky. Anyhow, I hope you guys have enjoyed these stories. If you have, please consider subscribing. And I'll try to do more of these before Halloween. Maybe even into November. I don't really know. But I believe today's the 25th. We have, let me think a minute. We have exactly 1 week. Counting today, we have 1 week of October left. We have 6 days before Halloween. Ooh. I hope you guys have enjoyed these videos. If you did, please consider subscribing. Really helps out the channel. And check out my playlist. With that, I'll see you guys later.